Hey guys, welcome to another ride in the Struggle Bus where every wheel is an empty triangle. Before I jump into this video, I'd like to thank the community for helping me out with this one. I really wanted to make sure that I did a good job with this video, and so I originally did what I do when I make videos, but then realized that I hadn't actually run it by anybody, and so and especially since this one is specifically for newer players, it's easy for me to overlook things that are challenging for beginners. So I reached out to the community, and a bunch of people answered the call. So thank you so much for that, guys. I really do appreciate it, and hopefully this video is now better than it was before. So thank you again, and with that out of the way, let's get to the intro proper. Hey guys, welcome to another Ride in the Struggle Bus, where every wheel is an empty triangle. Unlike my other videos, today we have a video that's intended for players who are brand new to the game of Go. Specifically, players who are having trouble scoring a game when it's over, or even knowing when a game is over. Go is often touted as being very easy to learn since there are so few rules. But time and time again, we see new players struggling to understand if a game is finished and who has won the game. It's tough to say that a game is really easy to learn if new players are having trouble figuring out if a game is even over or who won. So then they'll reach out online and often be told this game isn't over yet, so it can't be fully scored. And how frustrating is that? Or you'll play a game online and not understand why some of your stones are being marked as dead, or some of your areas aren't being counted as points. Also frustrating. So let's go over how to know when a game is over and how we actually score a game of Go. And let's do it on a 19 by 19 board that isn't just counting two territories, because this is what your games are actually going to look like. Scoring gaming isn't terribly complicated, but it's something that enough new players struggle with that it's worth going over. Your journey through Go is going to be enough of a struggle as it is, because the game's just so damn hard. We don't need this to also be a hurdle to enjoy this amazing game. Before we jump into this, though, I want to point you towards the good folks at Go Magic, who have a great video that also shows how to score a finished game. I've got their video linked in the description of this one. Their video focuses on a 9.9 board that's pretty easy to count, though, and it seems to be the larger boards that trip people up. So that's why I'm doing this one as well. So for the examples in this video, I'm going to be using Japanese scoring, but I wanted to go over the difference between Japanese and Chinese scoring because it's at least important to understand the two, especially since Chinese scoring tends to be easier to understand, but I find Japanese scoring easier to count because you have to count less things. So we're going to use the example that the Go Magic video used, and so you'll notice some similarities here. There are a couple stones that were captures that I've removed from this board, but it's not going to change the concept of what we're looking at here. So with Japanese scoring, we typically just care about all of the area that we've surrounded. So I've marked off the points that black gets here. So black has 31 points plus whatever captures he got. So if there were any captures, you would add that to the 31 territory that black has. And we would do the same for white. We count the same area that he's surrounded, which is 22, and then we're adding however many captures he has. And that'll give you your score for Japanese scoring. For Chinese scoring, we don't actually care about captures, but we also do care about the stones that are on the board. So we are going to be counting our territory plus the stones on the board. So in this case, what you can actually do is completely fill up the board at the end of the game and then count all the stones that are on the board, which is easier. This makes more sense, but there's a lot more counting to do here. And the reason that we don't care about captures for Chinese scoring is for every stone that you capture, that's one less stone your opponent has on the board, and stones on the board are also worth a point. So instead of you gaining the points, they kind of lose the points. And so this is easier to picture at the end. You just fill up your territories, you count whoever has more stones on the board wins, but there's a lot more counting there. And then the other important part of it is as you progress and start to learn how to count in the middle of a game to figure out if you're winning or losing and by how much, I guarantee you're going to be using Japanese scoring because you don't want to count every single stone that's on the board. You just want to count the territories. Again, going to be using Japanese scoring in this video, though. I'm going to go over things in reverse order of what you'd expect, and you'll understand why when we get to the second part. I'm going to start by first going over how to score a game, and then I'm going to go over how to know when a game is actually over. Okay, let's take a look at a finished game, and for this example I'm going to be using Japanese scoring since it's typically easier to count. Also, this game is a good example because this one isn't easy to count. Looking at it, it's pretty tedious. But this is what your games are actually going to look like. While the other video I linked does a great job of explaining things, theirs is a simplified example. Your games aren't going to be as simple. Anyway, the first thing that happens during a finished game is that both players agree on which stones are alive and which are dead. Once both players agree on which stones are dead, then those dead stones are removed from the board and added to the other captures. And it's important to point out that you do not need to actually capture dead stones. And in Japanese scoring, you actually lose points if you do. They are simply removed from the board and added to your other captures. So talking about removing dead stones from the board, it's important to understand what makes a group alive or dead. I'm not going to go into big examples with this, but we might as well go over what we have on the board here. And probably the toughest one to figure out is this bottom left corner. So it's worth noting that for a group to be alive, right, we need it to have two eyes. Hopefully you're at a point where you understand what I mean by that, but looking at like this group, we have an eye here and an eye here. White will never be able to capture this group because he cannot play simultaneously these two empty spots. Same thing with this group here. White cannot play here and here at the same time, so white will never be able to capture that group. Looking at this, white has no means of getting two eyes because C2 is never going to be an eye because black can play here and then white's going to have to fill, and if white doesn't fill, black captures. So that isn't an eye, and so this group is dead. White does have an eye here, but one isn't going to be enough. And the other important thing to go over is you don't have to capture dead stones, and that's something that beginners do a lot. Maybe in a situation black goes, oh, I can play here, and then I get to capture these. But we actually lose a point because of this, because again, we're using Japanese scoring. And if you play within your own territory, and this is now your territory because white's dead, you lose a point for this. And then if white passes, and then black captures here, and white passes, and black captures, and white passes, and black captures. Black actually just lost 4 points because he now has 4 stones in this territory. So it's important to understand that. Another important thing to know, because this is a question that comes up a lot, is can't we just play here and force white to capture this, and white will have to lose 1, 2, 3 points to do it? But again, same thing. Black can't live here, so white does not need to capture this stone. It just gets removed from the board at the end of the game. So just a quick little blurb going over what makes a group alive and what makes a group dead. But that isn't the intent of this video. I just wanted to highlight it a little bit. So I mentioned that once both players agree on the dead stones, but what happens if the two players don't agree on what groups are dead or alive, or simply don't know which groups are dead or alive? In that case, the game resumes to determine the outcome of those stones. Here, both players agree that the marked stones are dead, and they are removed and added to the other captures. So now we can count. To do that, you count every intersection that's fully surrounded by your stones. I've marked white's points with squares and black's points with triangles. You're going to notice there are some spots that have not been marked, like C14 and C15. Those spots are not surrounded by anybody, and they're not scored for anybody. We call those spots dame. They are neutral points on the board. So I've marked the spots that each player actually has for territory. Then you add the captures to the total. So here, black has 45 points, plus 5 white stones that were captured at the end of the game, for a total of 50 points. White has 66 points, plus the 12 black stones that were captured at the end of the game, for a total of 78 points. Also, white gets an additional bonus for having to play second, called komi. Komi is typically 6.5 points, so adding that, white has a total of 84.5 points. The end result of this game is that white wins by 34.5 points. And that's usually all we care about, the point differential. We wouldn't say that white won this game 84.5 to 50. We would say that white won by 34.5 points. Also, some of you might be wondering, why is komi 6.5 points? What's the deal with that? So komi is given to white because of the disadvantage of going second. That's really what it comes down to, is black gets an advantage for playing first, and so to balance that out, we give white a komi of 6.5 points. And so you're like, well, why is it 6.5 points? There's 2 reasons for that. So the half point is that to purposely make it so the games don't end in a draw. So with giving white 6.5 points, the game is always going to be at least white wins by half a point or black wins by half a point. Why is it exactly 6.5 points? It's changed throughout the years, but 6.5 is what it's settled on, and the community has decided that is the fair number. And again, this is based on professional play. In most of our games, we're typically not coming down to half a point, but in a lot of professional games, they do. So there's lots of historical data that points to, when using Japanese rules, that komi should be 6.5 points. If you're playing on an online server, this whole process is done for you, and you're going to be shown who won and by how much. Sometimes you have to mark the dead stones on some servers. On other servers, they mark them for you and either agree or disagree with them. When you're playing in person, though, it's up to you to do the counting. And there's a common method that's used to make counting way easier. When people score a game that they are playing in person, first they fill in their opponent's territory with any prisoners, and then slide their stones around so that the territories are turned into easily counted rectangles. Here's an example of how that would be done. So to start counting on a board that you've physically played in person, the first thing you're going to want to do is fill those neutral points that are not part of either player's territory, the points that we refer to as dame. And since we're using Japanese scoring that only cares about territory, we can actually just use all white stones to do that. And one thing that's nice about filling all these dame points is it's really going to show you if there are any Ataris that you've missed. So when you go along, you're just going to fill all those neutral points. And at this point, we've got one more here, and I think that is it. So then the next part is we take the captured stones and we put them to the side, right? So we'll take off these black stones that were captured and put them to the side, as well as these 4, and then these 3 on top. So we've got black's captures to the side, and then we'll have the white stones that get captured, which is just this group here. So then what we do, the next step, is you take all the captures and you fill in that player's territory with them. So we'll take the white stones and we will just fill in white's territory. So what we're doing here is instead of adding points to black's total, we're removing them from white's. And so we'll do the same thing with black captures. And so we'll go and fill some territories here. And then we can fill all of the bottom here. And then we've got 2 left over, so we'll just put them here. And then the next and most important step is we're just going to rearrange our territories into easily counted chunks and rectangles. And so we're going to take all these white stones and we're just going to move them around. And the important thing here is as long as you are moving them from a territory into another territory, it's not going to change the score at all. But what it is going to do for us is give us these really nice rectangles at the end that are going to be really easy to score, as opposed to that mess that was in, especially the mess that was in the center for white. And so we can do the same thing here and shift these around like so. And let's see. And one thing that's worth noting, it doesn't really matter, right, that we've got these black stones here because we knew that this was white's territory. So this is fine. And then we've got one more, and this is actually great for white because we've just got 2 very easy to count territories. And we'll do the same thing for black, as well as throw some stones around while we're at it. We can take these out and put them over here. And same thing, this leaves us with 2 very easy territories to count. So in this situation, this is a much more approachable way to score the game, just counting white's 2 territories and black's 2 territories. And when you do this, white is still going to win by 34.5 points. The difference is the total scores are going to be different because the prisoner is subtracted from the score as opposed to adding. But again, all we care about is the difference, which adding these 2 and subtracting these 2 will give that white wins by 34.5 points. Okay, so now that we know how to score a game, we can look at the other important part, how to figure out when a game is over. And now is when I reveal what actually happened with this game. The 2 players got to hear, decided the game was over, and said, okay, now what? They have no idea. So they reached out to people online and asked for help, and they got the very unhelpful answer of, this game isn't over yet. And what do you mean this game isn't over yet? Why isn't it over? We both passed. This game is over. Let's back things up a little bit. A game of Go ends in a very interesting way. When a player decides that there are no more points to be had, he or she passes. Then, if the other player also thinks that there are no more points on the board, he or she passes. 2 consecutive passes end the game. Another common mistake that we'll see from new players, not so much in a game state like this, but earlier when somebody's decided that the game is over and they lose, and so they just pass. And that's basically them resigning, but they're not resigning, they're just passing. But then if their opponent passes, it creates this really weird board state. The auto scorers aren't going to know what to do with it, and it often just gets funky. So if you're doing that, it's important to know if you're passing to resign, just push the resign button. If the game is not done, you should not be passing. If you are throwing in the towel and going, I'm losing this game, that's when you're supposed to resign, not pass. Now, a common mistake for new players is to assume that if your opponent passes, you must also pass as well. And that's simply not the case. If you see a move that still gets you points or reduces your opponent's points, you can totally play that move. It just means that your opponent missed that and passed. That was his mistake. In the case of this game, both players made a mistake by passing. There's still a lot of unresolved things on this board. For a game to be over, all borders should be firmly sealed, and you should know which stones are alive and which are dead. If there are border stones that can be put in Atari from the outside, they are not firmly sealed. So to understand why I'm saying there are still unresolved things on this board, let's take a look at the borders and the status of groups that might be alive or dead. An example of this is the stone at F8. Is it dead? Alive? What's going on there? Hopefully with me pointing it out, you can now look at that and go, oh, if black plays E8, then E9 is alive because it's connected. And if white plays E8, then E9 is captured. And yep, exactly that. It's not settled yet. There's still a move to play there. How about P1? Is that alive? Dead? Same thing as F8? Looks like we have a move over there as well. There are also some stones that are in Atari that can be captured, like F13. Black probably wants to fill at E13. And how about N13? Is that a point? How about P11? Is that a point? Or P13? We still have all these questions. And then there are the moves like B9, where if black plays this, white is eventually going to have to fill at A10. So if white plays here first, he's going to end up turning A10 into a point, but if black plays here first, then white will have to fill in here and lose the point. So as you can see, there are a lot of questions here, because there's still a lot of moves that need to be played to firmly seal the borders, which will define what spots are points or not. And let's not ignore the big ol' elephant in the room, which is E1. White playing E1 here likely ends up killing black's entire group and saving white's group, while black playing there does the opposite. It's like a 50-point swing. This game just isn't done. And maybe black thought the game wasn't over, but white passed, and he thought he had to pass as well. What's more likely is that there's new players playing this game, and they just didn't see all the unresolved points on this board. But there are a lot of them. I had to play 23 moves to get this board into a position that no longer had any points to be claimed or reduced. 23. Another thing that can cause issues, especially when you're playing online, is if we take a stone like K14 off the board as if it was never played. If neither player realizes that border isn't fully sealed and both players pass, automatic scorers are not going to know what to do with the area around L11. And that area is often going to get marked as neutral points. So white could end up losing 10 points if he doesn't play something like K14 and uses the automatic scoring tool. If you're unsure if a game is over, keep on playing moves. Just as long as you're not playing moves inside your own territory, like playing something like R17, you're not going to lose any points. Don't play inside your territory, though, like this. Every time you do, you're going to lose 1 point. That is actually the reason why both players eventually pass. The game will get to a point where playing another stone means that you lose a point. So the passing is the only option. Eventually you'll get a good enough grasp of when that occurs in the game and it's actually over, and you won't have to play every neutral point in the board, which again is called Dame. But until then, go ahead and play a move like J14. On this board that doesn't get you any points, but eventually in doing so, white will eventually fill T12, which does turn into a point even if he doesn't know it. So keep on playing the moves until you realize that playing a move is going to cost you a point, and at that point in time you can pass. So now we know how to tell when a game is over, and we know how to score a game when it is over. If you're playing online, as long as you close off all your borders, the server will score the game for you. If you're playing in person, though, you're going to want to manipulate your territories into those easy-to-count areas like I showed. I hope you guys found this video helpful and are now confident in how to score your games going forward. And I really hope that you guys enjoy your journey through Learn and Go. Until next time, thank you for joining us on another ride on the Struggle Bus, where every wheel is an empty triangle. Have a good one, guys.